Sneaky Nation, in this episode of Warframe, we finally have the introduction of Volt Prime. We're going to go over all of his stats, his abilities, and also compare him to regular Volt to see how the two differ. This was of course possible thanks to Horseman. He provided me with a lot of the drops I needed and also helped me farm the last one to finally build him. So big thank you to Horseman, or Screwy. He goes by many different names. We're also continuing to use the Candy Cane site to celebrate the holiday season. So again, Merry Christmas everybody, or Happy Holidays depending on what you celebrate. And as always, please remember to show your support, like and favorite if you enjoy the video. If you happen to be new, join us in Sneaky Nation by clicking subscribe for more videos in the future. And also follow me on Twitter for all channel updates and also video updates. Now let's do this. And here he is, Sneaky Nation. This is Volt Prime. As you may or may not know, my favorite Warframe in the series for the longest time was actually the regular version of Volt. And I was really happy when they ended up making him one of the starting frames. It makes a lot more sense to have him instead of Loki. Especially when I look back and I actually remember that Volt was the one that actually taught me the game, all the basics, and how to use abilities more often and whatnot. It was like around episode 22 or so, I want to say, that I finally started using abilities more consistently, and then people stopped complaining about that because that was one of the big gripes in the beginning of the series. But anyways, times changed, and of course, Volt wasn't my favorite Warframe for a long time anymore. But it's nice to have a different version to finally use, and he looks a lot cooler than the regular version of Volt, as most Prime frames do, with the exception of Mag Prime, unless you change your helmet off. But anyways, description-wise, a glorious warrior from the past, Volt Prime features the same polarities as Volt, but with unique mod polarities for greater customization. Alright, so let's go take a look at his abilities one by one. First up, we have Shock. Launches a shocking projectile. It stuns and deals high damage to a single target and chains damage to nearby enemies. Now, Volt is of course most effective against the Corpus faction. That's because they're vulnerable to electricity damage, and all of his abilities are electricity based, hence the name Volt, so it works out nicely. That does of course include his first ability, Shock. Essentially what this does is it fires out like a lightning bolt from his hand, and it will at least take down one enemy if you're aiming at them. It can even bounce off of walls too. But if there are a lot of enemies next to each other, it will actually bounce off and chain the attack together. So I know it can go up to at least 5, I'm not sure if you can get even higher with different power range. But at the very least you can get 5, and more than likely it's at least going to remove the shield for a Corpus. But with a different faction, may not necessarily kill them, like the Grineer are heavily armored, so it's not as effective against them. But at the very least, it's going to shock them and stun them and leave them vulnerable to attacks. So it's going to help you get out of sticky situations and also crowd control purposes. So if you get the power efficiency high enough, you can essentially cast as much as you want. Win-win. Next up, we have Speed. Volt energizes his body and nearby Warframes, giving them increased speed and dexterity for a short time. Now, as shocking as it is to believe, see what I did there? Speed is simply a speed buff, but it does a lot more than you think it does. Like, obviously it's going to make you move around faster, it's going to make you sprint faster naturally, but it also allows you to slide further because you're moving at a faster rate, so it makes sense. But you can also melee faster too, so you can take down a lot more enemies in a much shorter period of time. And it makes sense to use Volt as a melee frame, which works perfectly with this, because in his aura mod slot, the polarity icon there by default, unless you go and form it, is a V-shaped icon which matches up with Steel Charge, and that of course increases your melee damage. So if you stack this on top of like a Fury that's on your melee weapon, you can get the speed up even higher. So there are some weapons that you could get ridiculously fast and you could kill so many enemies and it would just be absolute craziness. But even better than that, it not only works for you, it works for your entire team if they're within range when you cast it. And then they can even wander off and it'll still work for them until it wears off. But this is actually really effective if you're trying to actually farm like credits. You go into T3 capture missions because you can finish those off fast. The rewards are pretty high. So it always makes sense to bring a Volt with you because you can always finish the mission faster if you can move faster. Plus, make quick escapes. That now brings us up to Electric Shield. Volt deploys an obstacle of energy, providing cover in any situation. So as most of you who have been following this series probably realize, this is my least used ability with Volt. It's not because it's a bad ability, it's just that I don't really typically use it. I just like to go around killing enemies. This is more of a defensive ability, which is why I'm on a defense mission right now. Trying to protect the cryopod with it. Now, these are effective because you can lay down as many as you can actually use with your energy. If you don't have enough energy, you can't keep doing it, but you can keep laying them down. It will protect against most gunfire, not area of effect attacks. Like, for example, if there was a bombard here firing his rocket launcher, or if a napalm was coming around firing his flamethrower, those would bypass the shield. But the shield is great because it will stop most bullets from the regular enemies. And another benefit to it, you and your allies can shoot through these shields, and they give you 50% additional electricity damage on top of the damage your bullets are already doing. Especially against the Corpus, it's going to work really well. And not only that, it also increases critical chance by 200%. That is crazy. You'll be able to kill so many enemies, so if you're using Volt, make sure you're using the shield quite often. Obviously, if it's going to be a defense mission, it only makes sense. And finally, his ultimate and my personal favorite ability of his, Overload. Volt emits an energy field destroying lights and other electronics which will violently explode and damage enemies. Oh yes, Overload. So many good memories. I've gotten so many MVPs with this ability alone, and if you're not familiar with the series, basically an MVP is when we go to the end of the mission results and see who has the most kills. We take into account all of the scoreboard stats, but most kills generally wins because that's the most important factor. Anyways, this ability actually casts out an energy field of electricity in all directions around Volt. Obviously it makes more sense to have a high power range so you can cast it further, and it's going to affect every enemy within the range. It may not necessarily kill them, with the Corpus very likely will, but even if it doesn't, it's going to make them get stunned, it's going to leave them vulnerable to attacks. And also, if you're in a room with electronics like the light fixtures, it's going to overload those and cause additional damage. This only works once per room, but it's still very effective when you do take advantage of it. Plus, you can cast it wherever you want to. If you're in the air, you can cast it. If you're sliding, rolling around, you can cast it. Personally, what I like to do is find a huge group of enemies and then try to slide into the absolute middle of them, cast Overload, and watch the bodies drop. And now we'll look for all of his stats at the max rank of 30. His sprint speed is 1, so I guess that's average. Shield is 450, power is 300, health is also 300, and then armor is 100, so more than likely we're going to take advantage of at least redirection, and if anything else, definitely vitality. Probably not a steel fiber, but you never know. So let's look at his polarity icons on here by default. In the R mod slot we have the V shape, so naturally steel charge works there the best, I'd have to say. I mean, you get all these extra points. You get 18 if you put it there, so why not? And I guess you could also use the one to increase damage from rifles too, rifle lamp. And really depends on which one you use more often. If you're more of a melee player or if you're more of a primary weapon player, really depends. And then we also have this. I guess probably Streamline would be the best bet here. You could even put Flow there. You could put Constitution there if you want to get up his duration for both his speed and shield, depending on what type of build you want to put here. And if you want to get power efficiency up even more, you can potentially put a fleeting expertise. And there's so many different ones. Natural talent if you want to cast your abilities more quickly, and also stretch if you want to increase the range. And then 2 V-shaped ones, so that works nicely, of course, with Intensify. And yeah, right here, Intensify to increase power strength. Could also put Blind Rage there to increase the power strength even further than normal, and potentially even a continuity there to get the duration up even further. So it really depends on what type of builds you want to use. There are so many different options, and Volt Prime gives you more choices polarity wise, at least without form, than regular Volt does. But let's go take a look at exactly how they compare. Okay, so there are 2 main differences between the 2 of them. Number 1 is power. Regular Volt has 100 power, however Volt Prime has 200, so he has twice as much at the default rank. And that means that he's going to have a lot more opportunities to use his powers, so that alone would give me the incentive to go for Volt Prime. But also, armor goes from 15 up to 100 to actually give you a chance to use a steel fiber if you want to make him more of a tank. But that really depends on what type of build you're going for. And that'll officially be the end of the episode, everybody. I hope you enjoyed. As always, please remember to show your support on the video. And one last time, I just want to say Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everybody out there. In case you missed the last episode, by the way, I mentioned the fact that we are getting very close to episode 200. As you may notice, this is 198, so there's one more episode before the big milestone. Because it's a milestone episode, it's going to be a big one, so it's going to be different than most of the episodes so far in the series. As you may recall, episode 100 was quite different, and it was certainly a lot more interesting, I think, than a lot of the episodes in the series. But with that, there's also going to be a big announcement, which is another kind of Warframe series. I did mention it during a Twitch live stream recently, so please don't spoil it for everybody else if you were there. But that's another thing. You should go follow me on Twitch so you can actually watch me when I live stream sometimes. It's twitch.tv/xxcgxx, and it's a completely different experience than watching me upload a video afterwards, because you can actually interact with me while I'm playing. And it's actually a lot of fun, so head over there and follow me. You can also set up notifications so that you know anytime that I do stream in the future. But that series will be announced in episode 200. I'm not sure when it's actually going to start, but I think it's going to appeal more to the veteran Warframe players who don't necessarily find appeal to my series, because I guess it's more or less meant for like newer players. But anyways, everybody, I will see you next time.